Hi, my name is James Ward. I'm from the Visalia Times Delta and Tulare Advanced Register, and we'd like uh, thank all of you for attending tonight's forum on systemic racism and healthcare. Um, Before we start and introduce our moderator and panelists, I want to go over some of what we're going to be doing tonight. For the first hour or so, the panelists will be asking questions to our moderator. And then for about the last half hour, we will be asking questions from the audience, which you can submit questions via Facebook or YouTube. Those questions will be moderated, and those questions must meet standards of politeness and all the other common sense standards, or we will delete those comments or questions if they don't meet our standards. I think what we'll do is introduce Lisa Marie as our moderator tonight, and then we'll bring in all our panelists for tonight's talk. Lisa Marie, you've got the control here now.
Right on. I don't think I've ever heard that before. Good evening, everybody. My name is Lisa Alvarado. I am a community member and a participant in the TC Voices Steering Committee. I am passionate about community organizing and putting people of color at the forefront of community to participate in this dialogue. So I'm really grateful to be here. Before we jump in, I just want to welcome everybody from home to this space. We did do a quick check-in, but please give us some grace. Some of us, this is our first time doing this. So grace with our nerves is encouraged. To give you a quick lay of the land, we have Amber Rodriguez, Kuya Delta Healthcare Board of Directors, Zone 5. We have Dr. Omar Guzman with Kuya Delta Street Medicine, also an emergency physician with Kuya Delta. We have Dr. Lori Winston, VP of Medical Education, the residency program. We also have Reina Rodriguez, the founder of Linguistica Interpretation, also public relationships of Proteus. And then lastly, we have Myra Becerra with Ivanhoe Community Council. We hope to have an engaging 60-minute conversation with you all. The intention of this is to spark some curiosity and conversation. We do not want to harm community, so just to set some group agreements, we encourage your questions. We encourage your curiosity. Our folks are doing their best job at fielding Facebook Live. So if you have a question, send it their way and they'll do their best to bring it back to us. And in the latter part of the conversation, we'll circle back to that. So the more engaged you are at home, the better dialogue we have here in virtual space. Another thing is one diva, one mic. This is specifically for my panelists. Remember, we want to give everybody equal time. So take space. This is encouraged for you to take space as the expertise, but also offer space. I know some of you are familiar with each other's work, so feel encouraged to call on your colleagues into this space. That's highly encouraged. I'd also recommend everybody putting on their respectful hat. Going back to our initial agreement, we're here to learn. So respect that space. This is not to silence anybody. So what that means is if we have any harm or any hate speech that's going to be coming through the dialogue, our folks really do care about our intentions. So they're going to be deleting some of those harmful comments. And again, that is only to ensure that this space is safe and constructive and conducive to the overall conversation. And we don't want to invite negativity into this space. So with that said, welcome. I want to elevate Kelly Baker with Onyx Counseling. She is the reason why I get to be the moderator today. She proposed us to stand in our power stand in our values as folks leading in equity. And so it really required us as a steering committee to have conversation at what does it mean and can we invite a person of color to moderate this space? So thank you, Kelly. All right. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and jump into our first question. I'm going to try to be really creative here, and I'm going to field this first question to Amber. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to read off the question, and then I'm going to invite you to speak, Amber. We can go in the order of how we introduced everybody. So it would be Amber, Dr. Guzman, Dr. Winston, Reina Rodriguez, and then Myra Becerra. So feel encouraged to jump in. And if you need help with the question, invite me back into this space and I can read it again. Our first question is for Amber. What barriers have you detected for people of color in accessing healthcare?
So I think one of the biggest issue is the overall health insurance and access to health insurance, and not just getting health insurance, but being able to pay for it. So the idea of a deductible, I'm lucky enough where my deductible is super low or my copays are super low, but understanding that privilege, because not everybody has that same access. And what does it mean to where somebody refuses to go to the doctor, not because they don't need to go, but because they don't want to pay a copay that's over $100, or they can't afford their medicine because the pharmacy has the EpiPen, something as simple as medication. So I think looking at health insurance companies and accessibility to not just getting health insurance, but the idea of it being actual prices that people could afford. I think a few weeks ago, I was watching a Canelo Alvarez fight, of course, and I didn't know that he was selling health insurance. I'm like, this sounds super dope and super cool. So I went online, I'm checking it out, and it claims for like $200 for the year. Your whole family can be insured, and it's here in the United States along with Mexico. But as I start going through it, it sounds like a little sketch. And I figured, how can we have this health insurance in theory? That sounds so great. Yet we're going to be taking advantage of these communities of color just because, I mean, who doesn't like Canelo? That's already like, I'm down for it. But really analyzing, if you don't know anything about health insurance, you're probably leading to, this sounds good. I'm going to be fighting for my health care with Canelo without realizing what does it actually mean? What's a PPO? What's an EPO? What's in network, out of network? So these conversations, it's accessibility not only to health insurance, but realistic coverage and affordable pricing.
Amber, am I hearing that it's not accessible because we're not outreaching to our communities with quality information and we're not engaging those communities? Is that what you're sharing?
Yeah, and also insurance companies thinking that they can take advantage of the people who might not know or not have access to that information.
Absolutely. Dr. Guzman, what do you say?
Oh, I completely agree. To add on that, I think I want to touch a little bit on health literacy, like you're talking about, like being able to talk to your patient is one thing, and trying to inform them in the maybe 20-minute, maybe 10-minute conversation you get to speak to them about their health issues is one thing, but how to maneuver the healthcare system within that time period is nearly impossible. We don't do enough outreach, especially to our communities of color, that is linguistically appropriate nor culturally appropriate for them, that they are able to maneuver the healthcare system. The other big thing is, even if you did have healthcare insurance, especially a big problem here in the Central Valley, is just lack of access to physicians, period. We live in a very, very medically underserved area where we lack physicians that will come and serve in the Central Valley, both in primary care as well as in specialty care. I'm pretty sure many of our just general population have had problems accessing cardiologists and gastroenterologists. And that's kind of the role that Cahuilla Delta has played with their residency programs in advocating for doctors to come and serve, practice, and stay in the Valley for the remainder of their careers, and trying to fill that hole. And I think that it's, especially in this area, we're talking about the Central Valley, you're talking about a large community of color and diversity. The other big thing that plays a big role is not having the ability to speak the same language as the provider. And so when you talk about communities of color, you're talking about different people from different walks of life, and having access to 24-hour translator services, even if it's not in Spanish, but also in the variety of languages that exist here, whether it be Hmong or Mixteco or whatever it is. That also has greatly limited people's access to care.
I'm excited to hear from Dr. Winston, but I just want to reiterate what I'm hearing from Dr. Guzman is that our large population of communities of color is just not meeting the need for enough physicians, and we're not being respectful of language access, which is not specifically just Spanish, but the gamut. Dr. Winston, with your position, what do you think about what Dr. Guzman shared?
I agree. I think that having moved here to California from Illinois was eye-opening to me because Medi-Cal, which is a large proportion of the insurance that our patients have, doesn't provide the same kind of coverage that people with PPOs and HMOs often have, and that Medi-Cal also doesn't reimburse physicians as well as some of those other plans. So doctors oftentimes, even in the Central Valley, maybe don't take Medi-Cal patients, right? So if you're a Medi-Cal patient and you need to see an ear, nose, and throat specialist, it's going to take time, and timely referrals to specialists is hard for the local, healthcare clinics to obtain. And I think, like Dr. Guzman said, that we're trying to make doctors here so that the studies show that when you train a physician, that they tend to stay within a 30-mile radius of where they trained, and we found that that's true with our residency programs, and we're excited that we get to increase the population of physicians here to help fight some of the tendencies that Medi-Cal has created.
Out of curiosity, I want to lean in a little bit. With your position, specifically cultivating new providers, is it difficult for you to cultivate providers that are culturally competent or aware of some of the gaps in this community?
When you run a residency program, there's a lot of rules, and thankfully we appreciate those rules. The ACGME gives us a lot of guidance on how to run residency programs, and we need to meet those accreditation standards. Part of that is having processes in place to increase diversity amongst our faculty as well as amongst our residents. And I think that's a good thing. For the Central Valley, we definitely, take a closer look at those individuals that are underrepresented minorities in medicine and also have ties to the Central Valley so that we can create providers that are like our patients.
Thank you so much. Reina Rodriguez, what do you think about barriers in healthcare with the community that you're serving?
Wow, well, I really want to say thank you, Dr. Winston. I totally agree on the fact that not having somebody who is likewise, in my example, my mother is from Veracruz, Mexico, a community that is very indigenous. So coming to the United States and having, to tell my mother, okay, a male doctor is going to see you today was a big no-no. So she would rather wait and, postpone her appointments till there was a female who could tend to her. And then on top of that, she was Spanish speaking only. So now she not only has to wait till she is seen by a female, but also somebody who can provide language access, which back in the day was really, not much different from what it is today. I know today there are some facilities that do provide language access, but I was the interpreter, the 8-year-old coming in with my mother to be the interpreter and help her navigate and, be there to help assist and, let her know what was going on with her health and do it in the most effective way that an 8-year-old could do it. And I still see that today. I still see many practices where, it's like, do you have a son or daughter who could come in with you? And that is the choice being given to families to really understand their healthcare situations. So it is very saddening to me to see that. And I would say that just as having that relationship with people that you feel are understanding of where you come from and who you are as a whole. Everybody has so many, many of us, and I could speak for myself. When I was young, I didn't go to the doctor unless I was really ready to go to the hospital. And, everything was, home remedies. Everything was, okay, let's let it pass by. Okay, she's got a fever. Let's, do this, that. But it wasn't till it was an emergency that I would go to the doctor. And that's still happening today. And I think that we don't acknowledge that for Latinos, if they're going to go to the doctor, or at least many of the people who, not just Latinos, but many of us who are, for the most part, having to work day and night just to make ends meet and not end up, with the half check, it is very difficult to lose a day. And when you go to the doctor, it's because it's a dire emergency.
Raina, I love what you shared, because I think when people think healthcare, they forget that this is something that affects us all intimately. And some of us are extremely private about our healthcare. So that cultural sensitivity or that comfortability is almost crucial and imperative for us to want to share with our providers what's really going on. And so you really do paint the picture. If, as a woman, I'm uncomfortable with a male, serving me, this is really just a human right issue, not so much getting into the weeds of like discomfort being like a privilege. I think people sometimes wear that hat where it's like, oh, that's just a bonus, when in reality, this is healthcare and we should really be in our most comfort. I want to invite Myra to this space. What do you think about this question with the folks that you're dealing with?
So I see the access, like not having access as even right now in COVID times, where a lot of the stuff had to be like to get a COVID test, you were doing it, registering online. Well, some of our communities, their school systems, everything, we saw the Wi-Fi is not great. Their internet access is not great. So how are they going to access a test that you have to pre-register for if you don't have the ability to do that part? And so we did have, different people saying, oh, I can help you register. And for the most part, it was easy. I helped some friends register, but they're like, you really need that? And it's like, yes, but ideally you would be, filling out your own form. So yeah, I'm asking you like extra questions, but it's supposed to be for that one person. So I know other people might not have felt that comfortable having someone else fill out that, the intake form type, and like the, basic questions, like, have you had this? Some other questions are just kind of like, why do I need it? Why are you asking me? Like, I'm helping you fill out your own for whatever reason. So I've always seen it. The barriers, the language has always been one. I, along with Reina, like interpreted for my mom and for even bigger and stuff. I mean, not saying that your mom didn't have them, but just not even knowing the medical term and really understanding it in English, and then having to translate it to Spanish has been like a lifelong thing. But I think doing it as your own, like your mom's, your dad's child, like it's even harder because some of the language, it's not even just the language. Like when you say it one way, and then when you translate it to Spanish, you have to add, something to make it softer, because you're speaking to a parent, you're speaking to a loved one. So it's one thing to just translate, by the books, but like if you're speaking to a loved one and you're having to interpret, it changes. You have to say it, soften up the message to a certain extent for some of the messages that we have to translate. So I think that's a big one, because when we're using our family, when we're using our friends, they're going to be nicer. And sometimes, when you're talking about medical, whether it's illnesses, diseases, or just care, like it needs to be the exact translation to a certain extent. And I think, at least for me, for some of them, it was difficult. And so I just feel like we do need more translators that are, trained with the medical language, that can actually do it. And then, like you said, being comfortable where you're there, it's hard. But I see so many barriers, and I was like, those are like the bigger ones. But I know, like the referral system, right? Like when my kids have had Medi-Cal, it's been a long process. When I was, lucky and I was working for VUSD, our insurance was pretty good. So I remember taking my kid to the doctor, having both Medi-Cal and my insurance from work, and the doctor being like, "Oh, you should be able to get referred right away. Or you're good. Just call in my office. You can get right in. I thought you only had Medi-Cal." And it's like, even if that was the case, like it shouldn't be a 3-month process versus call my office, So I told my son, like, "Oh, we're lucky," but at the same time, like, had he not double checked my thing and told me to wait this way, it would have been months before we heard the next step. So,
and I think even to that point, we shouldn't be relying on luck when it's our healthcare. We really should be relying on fact and services. I want to just recap, but also preface that we're going to ask the second question about specific examples in your community that you've been able to witness. And we're going to go in reverse order, because I think Myra is like touching on a specific example that that she's enjoyed with her community. So we're hearing that there's predatory insurance and there's unreasonable deductibles and copay. We're hearing that our patients are not having access to enough providers. We're hearing that Kuya Delta has made a commitment to cultivating providers within a 30-mile radius. So we are looking to provide some support there, but we're also faced with the bleak reality that there's so much that's lost in translation and the service isn't even provided, and folks are not even comfortable because we all are dealing with some discrepancies in how we're receiving information. So with that in mind, Myra, can you share a little bit about the Ivanhoe, about the community that you represent, and then maybe one example at how racism shows up? So you touched a little bit about the language not being translatable and it needing to be fact. Is there any other examples that you can think of that are common practice to the community that you're dealing with?
So I had one that resonates and it still bugs me now. Years ago, I had a really close friend of mine. He was a victim of a shooting, and I was at the hospital with him. And the first day, the emergency service took great care of him. The second morning, the doctor that came in took him off the pain medicine. So this is a person that had 3 gunshot wounds, not, and the doctor came in and took him off the pain meds because he didn't want him to become an addict, and told him that he should think about the actions that he had done to get to that situation. And like even to this day, it's still like I called and complained, but the hospital was pretty much like, okay, we'll look into it, but never really followed back. And back then I was more worried about making sure, my friend was okay versus, all this. But like even then I think about it, still bothers me that I'm like, how does this person, you're a doctor, you're supposed to be here to just save his life. Okay, that somebody did that part yesterday, but you're here to like get him healthy, get him better, and you're worried about what his past actions were. Like that's not your place. Like, and so that's one like big one that's stuck by me.
Oh, that's a good one. So it's an individual biases, regardless of how intelligent you are, regardless of what social status, those individual biases really do play a critical role in individual healthcare. Reina, what are some examples of racism that you're seeing with the community that you're working alongside?
Oh, okay. It's like, how do we narrow, right? I would say that one thing that happened recently, and it really caught my attention as to how many people could be affected by the situation. So a very close person to me was diagnosed with high cholesterol. So they needed to get medication, and not really knowing the system, first time visit to the doctor. And in many years, probably over 12 years, that this person had not gone to the doctor, but the situation was getting a little intense. They were starting to feel some numbing and like on their joints, and said, okay, I think I have to go in. So finally they go in, and this is a farm worker, somebody who is not making a very high income, let's just call it about $400 a week, and has a family of 6, and went to the doctor. Next thing you know, they end up with medication worth over $200 and some odd a month. And, they felt like, okay, what do I do? So they went and ordered their prescription. Next visit, they actually had some time to talk to somebody, and they said, hey, like, I really need this, and I do want to take care of myself, but I can't afford this. This isn't sustainable for me. And if it wasn't because one gentleman decided to stop everything and say, let's take a look at your situation. Let's see what your income is. Let's see the guidelines. Let's see what programs we have available. His monthly expense on medication went from $250 to about $20 a month, just because somebody took the time to sit there and talk to them about the different programs that there are available for sliding scale, and different programs at clinics. I won't give any names specific, but I know we have some amazing clinics out here in Tulare County who are going above and beyond. But if the services are there, I really think that during intake, especially if we know that somebody hasn't had treatment in a long time, I think more time should be allotted to those community members who have just let go of their own personal care to care for their families.
Thank you so much. I think, our farm workers living in the Central Valley are unsung heroes. So the folks that are working over 10 hours a day in intolerable conditions, susceptible to the most harm, we're literally not serving that community. Thank you, Reina, for being so vulnerable. And also to Myra, thank you for sharing your story. We want to validate you for being courageous. Dr. Winston, what are some examples that you're seeing from your space?
Quia Delta does take an active interest in these things. I do serve on the Healthcare Disparity and Clinical Competence Committee for the hospital, and we are taking a look at our race, ethnicity, and language data. Some of the latest data during COVID has been, certainly suggestive of some of these trends. We also just finished a study where we took a look at language and whether or not limited English proficiency had an effect on readmission rates and mortality for acute, like heart attacks, pneumonias, and heart failure. And interestingly enough, it actually showed pretty well for our interpretive services department because they are around 24/7. We don't use family members to translate. And there was no statistically significant difference there. And I was surprised by that. I kind of thought that we would see something. I think the COVID data is going to be more eye-opening, and I'm excited to delve into that next.
Thank you for sharing. I think after hearing, this panel, it's clear that we've done this community a disservice. And so engaging this community is probably going to require a little bit more effort on our end to rebuild that trust. And I think I'm excited to touch base with you to hear if that data from COVID maybe changes. Dr. Guzman, what do you think?
I think that as far as like implicit bias and this the talk about like the lack of time to talk with patients. I mean, these are things that I deal with on a daily basis. One of the reasons I went into emergency medicine in the first place. I like to share. I was born and raised here in the Central Valley. I was actually born at Quia Delta. The whole reason I went into medicine was to serve my community, and I saw a lot of barriers to accessing care. The different ways that you could call it racism or structural violence or whatever, implicit bias affected my family members. So, and that's one of the reasons I became a physician. And one of the things that we do at Quia Delta that I'm very proud of is we started looking at ways that we can engage our partners in the community to kind of start effect changes. So what I mean by that is we talked about the mistrust in the healthcare system, overcoming these biases by having somebody that looks like you, walks like you, talks like you, treats you. Two things that we do. One is we started pipeline programs, because without a pipeline program, without somebody reaching down to a high school student that may come from a underserved background and letting them know about medicine, then they may not have any clue of how that, or even have a thought of ever going into medicine. And so one of the projects that I started when I got here was a doctor's academy at a Rosie High School to give students from similar backgrounds as myself an opportunity to learn about healthcare, their journey to healthcare, get their parents involved, so that we can home grow our own physicians. Because the studies show that people that grow up in areas that are underserved, such as these, are more likely to go back to those areas to serve if they become physicians. And so why not home grow our own physicians so that you can be treated by somebody that looks like you, walks like you, and grew up like you? The other thing we do is something called street medicine, and that's what I'm the director of. The idea was starting to meet people where they are, make house calls again. And so the street medicine program was established to provide care for one of our most vulnerable populations, which is our homeless community. And so we actually go out into the streets, out into the encampments, and go basically tent to tent and provide treatment, rehumanizing this community, giving them the dignity they deserve, and actually trying to regain their trust. And I think that the lessons that we learned from that can be applied to not to any vulnerable community, like the migrant farm worker community and our patients, and it gives us more time. But it's this outreach, it's this reaching back out to the community that I think that we do at Quia Delta, and we've been doing to try and overcome some of these stories that you're hearing right now.
I can feel my own fire inside my body elevating. And I'm thinking of Sarah Marquez and disability justice. And when we talk about really looking at our most marginalized, when you focus your love and care to the humanity that you talk about, the collective benefits. So thank you for everybody. I'm just getting excited. Ambar, can you maybe share with us? I know that, you know, with this community space, you have a you have an interesting perspective with your day job and being on the board of directors. Share with us what incidents you're seeing.
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to say I'm super lucky to exist in the same space as all of you. And then to Dr. Winston and Guzman, because not only do they save lives, but they're also in this community and advocating for the stuff that we've been trying to call out for years. So if you've lived in Visalia, you know this community, and it's so refreshing to have people to actually like, yeah, I agree with you. We need to be culturally sensitive. I agree with you. This is a problem, and this is how we're going to address it. So we're no longer talking the talk. We are now walking the walk, and it is so beautiful to see, and I absolutely love it. As far as an educator perspective, when it was mentioned translating as an 8-year-old, so many times and so often my students get pulled out of school. And so what does it mean for their education when they have to leave school to translate for their families? And I mean, it's needed. They are either the oldest or whatever responsibility roles they have to be that translator. But what does it mean for their education? And I think in the times of COVID right now, it's really, I'm at the point and getting kind of frustrated with kind of the dialogue that exists with a lot of the research to start opening up schools is not reflective of our communities of color, is not reflective of these multi-generational homes when you're living with your abuela, when your older siblings have kids. So you don't even have a room because that's for your niece and nephew. You don't even have a bed because you're sleeping on the couch. I have a few students sleeping in the kitchen if they have a sleeping bag. And so having this idea of, yeah, let's go ahead and open up the schools based off of this research that's not reflective of our communities of color. And like Reina mentioned, it's not just race, it's class as well. So this intersection of race and class now becomes, how can we provide the best equitable education ever in a time in a pandemic, ignoring the fact that they're living with their abuelas, ignoring the fact that these are all essential workers, farm workers, yet we don't want to give them certain access to resources. So that's super frustrating on an educator's perspective and on the healthcare perspective, because it ends up going back and forth, and it's not fair for my students. And I mean, they can't just quarantine in their backyard in their extra cool suite or mother-in-law quarters when they don't even exist in like the proper housing.
Wow, I think we all just covered how the systemic piece of it really does harm the collective community. We have pulling out from school. There's a language having to translate. There's like the stress and the concern of not feeling comfortable sharing fully with your provider. There's a discomfort and just maybe outreaching for community support. The next question that we want to know is if you guys believe these incidents are the result of deliberate bias or ignorances, or is there something that we're maybe not seeing? And we'll do this one popcorn, because I know this really does depend on like where you're seated. So what are some folks' thoughts there? Is this intentional?
I'd like to say that when it comes to language access, I would say that some of it would, I'd have to hope and pray that it's just the ignorance of knowing what is really being translated. Obviously, as a language access professional, I get to see contracts and who's on the contract, and most institutions have to, publicly dispel who received the contract. And many of the providers are out of state. They're not even from California. Many of them hire representatives who are from Costa Rica, from Bolivia, from Nicaragua. And I love all my colleagues, and I understand that they are great interpreters. As a matter of fact, on my team, I have Nicaraguenses, I have people from El Salvador and many different countries. But when I call them for an assignment, I have to clarify, by the way, you will be interpreting for a Spanish speaker from Mexico, because the language is going to be different. There are going to be words that maybe you know one way, but our community knows a different way. So we almost have to coach before every meeting and make sure that the community knows what to expect. Who will my interpreter be? And sometimes even the accent will throw you off. It's like, no entiendo. And, and because time is of essence, community members will just let it slide. Even if they didn't understand the word, they will let it slide because we're in a time crunch and things are moving at a real fast pace. So you'll get the nodding, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there is comprehension on the other end. So I would love to call our medical providers to really make sure that when you are pairing a community member, let's make sure that if it's a Spanish speaker from Mexico, let's make sure that the language accessibility is to par, so that they're not getting these, different words that they don't understand because they're not from their country. And it's not something that the interpreter who was hired, who was maybe from another South American country, deliberately did, but, that's the language that they know and have grown up and really understand. So that's one thing that I would definitely make sure that, is understood, that Spanish is not just Spanish. There are so many variations, and same thing with other languages. This is something that we have to go through consistently. So I would definitely want attention called to that, so that we don't just feel that a language provider, because they speak Spanish, is going to be able to serve in the most appropriate way.
If it's okay. So I think that one thing that we miss a lot is focusing on the social determinants of health. And so for those that aren't familiar with it, studies have shown that 90% of your health outcomes are not due to bacteria, viruses, or the things that we actually take care of in the hospital, but actually the resources and that you have access to in your community and the place where you live. We know that simple things like lack of transportation, lack of access to healthy food, lack of access to an education, to shelter if you're homeless, these things have a greater impact on your healthcare than the things that I can write a prescription for and try and affect change in. And they're things that healthcare professionals, especially medical doctors, don't receive a lot of training in. And so one of the things is we focus a lot on the institutions that provide care, but healthcare policy is all policy. It's public policy. It's who decides where a park is built in our community, who decides if a community has access to drinkable water. And those types of things go outside of Cahuilla Delta. And that's why, one of the reasons why Cahuilla Delta started to reach out and engage our community partners, because we know in order to actually affect change in the healthcare outcomes of our patients, we have to create a healthy community, and therefore partner with our community so that we can advocate on their behalf at the policy level and affect change in what they call these structural issues. And we didn't get to this the way the community was built today within the last 5 years or even in the last 10 years, right? This is the way that the community is built today, and the different parts of towns that you can think of that are unhealthier than other parts of town, right? The so-called north side of Visalia compared to the northeast side of Visalia, right? They weren't built by chance, right? They evolved because of different incentives and different agendas and whatnot. And so I think that a big part of healthcare is empowering our communities to have a political voice and to learn to use it. And I think that's one thing that we tend to kind of miss, and why you continue to see these types of atrocities happen. These stories come up over and over and over again, and we try and address it, but we're addressing it almost like at the local level, but we're missing that system level stuff.
Yeah, I'm hearing you. So, you're sharing, there's an accountability of and these communities were intentionally built this way. So there must be an acknowledgement. So now let's reverse engineer and make those wrongs right. Does anybody else on the panel have any insight in this question in particular? Like, is this intentional? Is this an oversight?
Yeah, I just want to jump off of what Dr. Guzman said as far as if we look at the greater ideas and the greater issues, absolutely public policy. The idea of pesticides, clean drinking water. And I know I was super excited on the north side when the soccer fields got built and there was lights. I'm like, yes, we can finally play when it gets dark. And unfortunately, you have to pay for that. And they say, we don't provide lights for parks, yet Plaza Park's tennis courts are lit for free. So thinking of the ideas of, well, who's included when we build these parks? Who's excluded? And what type of resources do these parks have? I think it's larger than just, here is a clinic. All the problems belong to this clinic. It's the bigger ideas of the public policy that takes place.
I'm so grateful that we are focusing on the systemic piece, because the call to actions are just really that civic participation that's inclusive of the collective. I'm just so grateful for this conversation. The next question that we have for the panel is specifically related to how has the history of our nation's relationship with minorities affected how they regard healthcare? And I think that plays hand in hand with what we've been talking about. Dr. Winston, would you feel comfortable starting us off?
Sure. I think that there's a problem right now in medicine in that that the doctors aren't representative of the patient populations that they're treating, and that the studies show that patients who are cared for by someone that understands them and understands their culture actually accept more care and get more tests and actually ultimately become more well. And I think that now the focus has shifted on that, where people recognize that this is important. If we continue to make physicians at the, Latino physicians or Latinx physicians at the rate that we are, I think it's something like 5 centuries before we'll ever get to parity or where we need to be. So something's got to change. And I think that the new focus on changing policies and procedures to systemically address what kinds of physicians we're making is now at the forefront.
Wow, that is stark. It will take 5 generations to replenish in order to be equitable. Is that what I'm hearing?
I learned that from Dr. Guzman. But yes, Dr. Guzman, you can correct me, but it's my understanding it takes 5. It will, if we continue at the rate we're at, it'll take 5 centuries to make a physician workforce that is representative of the patient population.
For Latinx physicians.
For Latinx physicians, yes.
Specifically Latinx. Wow. Dr. Guzman, do you want to add to what Dr. Winston was sharing?
I think, I guess one thing that I wanted to talk about is this distrust in the healthcare system. And it stems a lot from, there's a book called The Medical Apartheid, where they talk about the different ways that we developed medicine by utilizing, basically disempowered communities to test on. It's the Tuskegee experiments. So you talk about forced sterilization of Latinas at USC. So it's created this distrust in the healthcare system, not only because of the scientific, but also because you don't see the person, you don't see yourself in the doctor that is treating you. And so there's obviously something structural there. We, little by little, the healthcare system has started to say, we need to accept our past and we need to apologize for it. And we need to start figuring out how we can gain the trust back of our communities and reform those patient-doctor relationships again. The American Medical Association recently published an apology for its years of racist policies, of not allowing African-American or female physicians to sit on their executive board, and just having these policies that kept people of color from sitting in at the table where policies are made. And as those things, as people start looking, as the healthcare system starts looking at the policies, because these policies were created not last year, they weren't created a decade ago, they were created years ago, 50 years ago, right? And so it's as people talk about structural racism within the healthcare system, they have to realize that it has nothing to do with the person that's sitting at the desk today and their implicit bias or their ideas of color or race. It has to do with the people that wrote the policy, which didn't get written yesterday. It got written years ago or decades ago. And so to say that the ideas behind how people see equity and how people see racism and how people see even gender equality haven't changed in the last 50 years, well, that doesn't make any sense. And so therefore, we have to start looking back into the policies that dictate not only who becomes a physician, but who gets into higher education, how it's paid for, the tests that we make people take. And so all these things now, especially with the recent current events that are going on right now, it's very much people want equity, and that's something that we're fighting for as physicians.
I feel like when you talk about collective wellness, you can look at this from macro, micro, right? Like, so in order to heal, there needs to be an acknowledgement. There needs to be, set boundaries. There needs to be a model of like how we rely on. And I think that you paint that so well. Like, we have a history of harming and abusing our community. We have the AMA looking to step into that position and take ownership. You see Quia Delta looking at going to the communities to repair. I think what's happening is my brain is marinating on last conversation that we had, which was systemic racism in education. And I think, Dr. Guzman, you just paired how systemically we can even widen the scope, and those who become doctors and the education system as a feeder itself kind of comes into that. Amber, I know that this is something that you're really passionate about. Do you care to share, history, her story, so kind of your background?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say imposter syndrome, absolutely so real. And I think a lot of times pushing my students of color into even applying for COS or attending COS, it's kind of like, well, I don't think I belong in this space. And I know when I went to grad school, I started questioning myself, like, do I really belong in this space? Am I smart enough? Looking at the type of people who existed. And I think encouraging people to come back as physicians or to even go into any type of medical field or just higher education in general, the imposter syndrome of how we were kind of not necessarily validated growing up, because even teachers were not reflective of what we looked like. I remember sitting in a classroom and they asked, well, what do you normally eat for Christmas? I'm like, oh, tamales. Like, oh, that's not real traditional food. So that already discouraged me for wanting higher education and feeling like I belong. So that is kind of the cycle of how do we get people of color into these spaces of higher education if they're already struggling in that elementary, middle school, high school level. So everything absolutely makes so much yes to what was going on.
Yeah, I want to be mindful of time. We have about 10 more minutes of some of this dialogue before we jump into some of the community's questions. So I want to go ahead and just give this space back to y'all as presenters. There's some final questions about how does bias translate to physical harm, specifically speaking to faulty prescriptions, misdiagnosis, not making appointments. We can even talk about COVID. Myra made a good point about COVID, access to language and some of that cultural competency. So for our last 10 minutes, if we can maybe go round robin at what does this look like as a harmful practice in real life? Like, what are some tangible examples of where we've really got it wrong and it's negatively manifested? I would love to perhaps start with Ambat, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of times, or just from my personal experience being a female and a female of color, when I had stomach issues, first thing as soon as I would go into a clinic is, well, you have to take a pregnancy test. Like, cool, I just took that yesterday and I'm telling you now it's still negative. And so not being believed on the actual symptoms that I had and just automatically assumed Tulare County, high pregnancy rate, anybody that comes in with stomach issues, we're just going to try to make it seem like it's pregnancy. And I think the lack of being taken serious and the frustration of what's the point of me even going to the doctors if I'm not going to be taken seriously, and I'm going to be written off. I know for sure I'm not the only one that has experienced that. Other people have mentioned that they get dismissed too, or they get their symptoms played down. And it, like I mentioned, I don't think it's just a race problem. There's other intersectional things going on. Mine was specifically, I mean, female with pregnancy. I don't think they make the males do pregnancy tests, but it's really frustrating when you're not taken seriously, when you know something's wrong with your body, you know your body.
Dr. Guzman, I know you're on the front lines with your street medicine. What are you seeing from your perspective?
Well, I think that biases play a large role. Especially working with the homeless population. When I say the word homeless, I'm pretty sure all of us think of this picture in our minds of what that patient looks like, what kind of things are probably wrong with them, whether it be psychiatric or we talk about substance abuse. But actually being out on the streets and actually talking to them and figuring out why they ended up out there, what kind of issues they're having in accessing healthcare or even accessing housing, the kind of lives they live, it really changes your perspective. And so I think that's what a lot of healthcare is to focus on, that whole patient-doctor relationship. Now, it's hard because not many of us have ever experienced poverty or experienced homelessness. In fact, there was a study that said that 3% of medical students come from families which fall in the lowest 20% income group. Yet 60% of medical students come from the richest families, with their incomes in the highest 20% tier. So if you haven't walked in your patient's shoes, it's difficult for you to identify with them. And that's, again, goes back to who are we letting into medical school? How are we training them to walk in people's shoes and get rid of those biases? The other thing I will touch on real quick is the inclusion of race in medicine. Race is a social construct. It is not some sort of genetic ancestry that you get from somebody. It's a social construct. Somebody tells you your race, and that's what you're labeled as throughout life. But it's been included in the healthcare system. It gets included in things like how we calculate your kidney function, how we calculate somebody's ability to do a vaginal delivery post C-section. Those things we recognize now as a healthcare system don't belong in there, and they've been as medical education moves forward, those types of things have been started to take out. Take the race out. Take that and think more about asking this patient what their background is, where they come from, how did they get to you, and exactly what Ambar says, listen to the patient. And so I think that's all I had to say on that.
Absolutely. And on that topic, it's like we could even extend that to sexual orientation, sexual identity. This is all social constructs. So thank you for elevating that. I believe we have next Dr. Winston.
Yeah, I think first I would like to make sure that we pay attention to what Dr. Guzman just said about, the idea of the social determinants of health, that the United States of America scores poorly in how well we take care of our population, that we do not live the longest. We have terrible infant mortality compared to these other countries. And yet we spend all of our money, a lot of our money, on healthcare. So why is that? And it really does highlight that these other countries that are doing better than us are doing so because they spend their money on the social determinants of health, on healthy food, on having communities where you walk and have a park and have access. So I think that that's an important point. I also think that, this discussion is about inequities in general. We as the residency program do have a committee that focuses on that. And I think it's important as the providers change, and even as a woman physician, that I need to counsel my residents who are women or who don't traditionally look like a doctor on how they're treated, both in the hospital and in this community, even by patients who are not always used to seeing a physician that doesn't look like a traditional doctor. So.
Thank you, Dr. Winston. Raina?
I do want to share maybe a few things that may really click with community members, especially nowadays. When I was about 7 years old, I had a diagnostic of having asthma, and that I thought I had asthma. So I would avoid running. I would avoid doing any strenuous exercises or anything of that sort. But what was really going on was I was living in a stressful situation, a household that was not your traditional household. So I was having a lot of anxiety as a child. And, instead of, those patterns of, hard breathing being really seen as perhaps a situation that was affecting my emotional state, it was I had a diagnostic of having asthma and was given an inhaler to this day. And as soon as I decided, you know what, I don't think I have asthma, I stopped using an inhaler at 12 and found out that I really did not have asthma. I just had a really rough childhood. At about age 16, I had a blackout at school. I never realized that I had vision problems. And I never realized this because I grew up just like every normal kid. I never went to the doctor, didn't see an optometrist till I was 16. Next thing you know, I was considered legally blind at 16 and finally finding out. And all this time going through school, just having a really hard time reading and, trying to memorize everything I could just so I could get by and feel like I was a normal kid, because I was treated like a normal kid. So these are things that happened that, were not really caught when I was young. And it wasn't my mother's fault. She didn't know where to take me. She had never been to an optometrist herself till she was in her 40s. So it's difficult to teach and do what you don't understand yourself. And to end, I just want to say, speaking back a little bit about the history of our nation, let's just realize that, public charge has now become part of our history. And there are many community members who have stopped going to the doctor because they want to dream and have that dream of having some sort of legal status in the United States. And if that dream is so much more powerful than, going to the doctor for preventive care, when, all they could really afford is maybe being on Medi-Cal or being on a sliding scale. And, how are these free services going to affect my possibility of gaining a legal status? So that is seen as like, the top level for us, something very important that we don't want to lose a hold of. And, if not going through the Medicare system and getting Medi-Cal is going to allow us to get to that status, then we avoid going to the doctor.
Myra, you want to wrap us up on this question?
Yes, Mario. For the misdiagnosis, it's I see different examples. One of them for me was not myself, but one of my sons. He can't stay still, but before that, he would like not pay attention, but they thought it was vision, so they sent him to a clinic. We went to the clinic and they did the eye test, and yeah, so they referred him out to my to an eye doctor. I took him to he's an optometrist. And his response is like, he can see perfectly fine. He can't stay still, but he can see perfectly fine. He doesn't need glasses. And I just think that had he gone to one that maybe wasn't the same doctor that I was seeing, because I didn't have Medi-Cal then, so I would have to pay for him. But he was able to get seen through him. They referred him somewhere else. They might have ended up giving him glasses because when he's doing the whole test, he failed the first one, and so he had to go to the second one. And just like that right now, how Reina had said, I do remember them like, oh, we don't know, we can't tell you what he needs, but we're gonna make him an appointment so he can get glasses. And so then I took him to my own eye doctor, and my eye doctor was like, nope, he does not need glasses. He cannot stay still, but he can see perfectly fine because he did the actual, the inside the eye test and all that. And so that was just one example that I really related to Reina right now. But overall, I do see different, a lot of misdiagnosis with someone coming in and, the time limit. So they have, they know their doctor's only going to talk to them for maybe 5 minutes, 10 if they're lucky. So they're only trying to say what they're feeling right now. the same time, I want to add that there's times when a lot of our local clinics, because of the way insurance works, because of everything else, a patient will go in and have, I'm here for my diabetes check, but my arm's been bothering me. Okay, well, you got to come back. Like, yeah, that's different because of coding, because of, whatever the way it works to charge the patient, they're not being treated as a whole. And I'm like, if this was a private clinic, or this was your own parent and this was your own child, you would want them to be seen. But a lot of our clinics don't do that. So if they go in for one thing, that's the only thing that they're going to be seen for. But a lot of them, it's already taken me 2 months to get this appointment. I don't want to come back another 2 months for an arm that's hurting again, or come back next week, sit in through the whole process.
Of course, Dr. Winston, please.
I was just going to add that I hear that all the time, and that in our family medicine residency program, family medicine is about taking care of people across the continuum of their lives. And when I tell patients that we have a clinic in Visalia that has physicians who will see you and you get to know them and you get to see them more than once, it's so powerful, because you're right, that model isn't prevalent in our community. And I think that it's really the right one.
Thank you, Dr. Winston. And it's actually really perfect timing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite folks to just take a breath and re-engage your body. We've got some community questions that have been coming in that specifically speak to the dialogue that we've been having. Dr. Winston, you actually touched on this right now. There was a conversation at how do we mitigate revolving doctors, and really how do we build relationships? So we'll get into that. There was also some conversation on preventative care and how do we engage communities of color in a culturally sensitive way. There was another question about how is Kuya Delta outreaching our underserved communities? So maybe just sharing some of those wins. So before we get into those, I will have those questions. And then I do want to share at the end, I'd love for you to engage the audience at like how they can get a hold of you or how they can find you. That way, in case any of the audience members want to continue some of these conversations, we can have that. And I also want to end on maybe some hope, what's working with you and your community, what's specifically crushing it. Dr. Winston, I'm specifically thinking about Kuya Delta and their transportation service, and the fact that it's just so wonderfully, I live in Exeter, so I actually utilize that service, and it's a really big benefit. And the gentleman who drives me to Woodlake is a phenomenal human. So yeah, stretch. The first community question is revolving doctors. How do we build relationships? What can we do to be better about getting comfortable with our providers?
I could say it again, but I agree that locally the clinics that are around, literally when I work in the emergency department and I ask patients, do you have a doctor? Their answer is no. And then you say, where do you go to the doctor? And they say, oh, I go to this clinic. And I think that's a shame. I think that everybody deserves to have a provider that can get to know them and that can care for them when they need it.
And this is community space. So I like to say this is like popcorn style. Feel encouraged to jump in. All of this is valuable dialogue.
I will say that's one of the questions that is like for a lot of the COVID vaccines. That's one of the questions, like, do you have, your provider, and then like the address, and a lot of people are responding, no. There's like, they'll maybe, or like, well, sometimes I go to this clinic, and I see that as we're here. Thank you. We're here to help. But at the same time, that ends up, hurting us in the long run, not having a doctor that we can go that has our file, that has everything to. When you're not feeling good, they're like, oh yeah, I remember last time you had this, versus you just have to show up and hope that they do the best they can.
Thank you. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share?
Yeah, I was just going to point out that VMC here in Visalia Medical Clinic, they do really well by not only having like, here's a picture of the doctor and kind of a bio, there's also videos where you get to know them. I think one of the physicians talks about like their dog, and you're able to choose your provider, and then you start building that relationship. And it feels so good to actually go to a doctor and a provider who cares. Like, oh yeah, you were reading that book that last time. Like, what are you reading now? And I think that makes it so much easier to share things, so much easier to be comfortable, be vulnerable, so you can get the health care that you deserve.
COVID has highlighted so many things. And I remember I had an appointment with my daughter, and I needed to take my mother into the doctor as well. And all three of us were not able to go in. And, you know, it was either miss one appointment, take the child home, and who do I leave the child with, you know, or take my mom home and not give her the care she needs today. But it isn't something new. Many times when I've gone to clinics, I'm not going to lie, every single time there is an upset front receptionist or somebody yelling at the mom because the child is being a child and playing and trying to entertain themselves for that 2-3 hours that they were there in the waiting room. I think we all get stressed when we have to wait for a long time. And I think there is not enough empathy when it comes to families, and really realizing that sometimes they don't have another person to take care of their child while they go and try to get treatment or go to the doctor. So I would say that just having that really comfortable setting that is really oriented to families of all shapes and walks, you know, whether it's a single mom who doesn't have a person to take care of their child, or, you know, grandma who takes care of her grandchildren, because that, you know, how else does the mother go and, you know, to work? These are situations that are so real and so embedded in our community. And I think empathy is huge. And I don't think enough time is spent to really coach the front reception and everybody, you know, who needs to understand that family dynamics are so different for everybody.
I think we have a lot of folks having conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think a lot of people prioritize their management, you know, because leadership is a top-down effect. But I think, Raina, you just elevated a good point that this is really the collective. Like, we should collectively be engaging in conversations about inclusivity. And like Dr. Guzman said, you know, perspective can be so valuable here. If 60% of our providers are coming from spaces of privilege, we can't anticipate that those providers be understanding of where we come from. But also, because that privilege is in that space, it is really up to those folks to really be engaging the community that has been abuse of the trust. Kind of got on a rant there. Let me relax. Does anybody have anything to add to this last question? Sweet deal. Okay, cool. The secondary question that we had was preventative care. How do we engage our communities of color? I know that the Whitman Center does our Zumba, and those ladies are crushing it, and they're there consistently. I believe that's a program of Kuwait Delta's. But does anybody have any insight on how we can do a better job here?
I think starting young. So I know BUSD with some, not all schools, it's still a work in progress. They have the Joven Noble, which is targeted to like our young males, or Hispanic males, Latino males, Mexican males. But even a program like that where they're talking about, you know, they're talking about sex, they're talking about health, they're talking about different stuff, and learning it through someone, you know, that's familiar to them, that's comfortable for them, it makes it a lot easier. You know, our kids are getting, whatever we speak to them, but from school, they're getting that basic 5th grade, 6th grade class, and that's it. Maybe when they get, you know, a year older. So having all that preventative, in the kids to eat right at a young age, because, you know, they touch the subject at some point, but it's, you know, the kids learn for like a month or a week or something, eat healthy. They're all excited, but then it doesn't really come back. And your parent telling you to eat your vegetables is not the same thing as, you know, it's real information coming from somewhere else.
I second that. Childhood nutrition, school lunches. I mean, paying attention, you know, creating healthy communities, meaning putting places to play, places to run. Obviously, more post-COVID than now. Those are essential. So again, it goes back to you know, community advocacy for saying where a park is going to go, or what you know, who has access to this and who has access to that. Putting bike lanes in, putting more trails into Visalia. closing off streets instead of allowing cars to drive down them, allowing people to walk down them and create that sense of community again. I think that's huge. We know that nutrition, what you put inside your body, I mean, that's like the key to weight loss right there. That's the key to like reversing most chronic diseases. Exercise is great for cardiovascular, but as far as weight loss and diabetes and high cholesterol and a lot of these chronic issues, diet is huge. With addressing food deserts, how can you tell somebody to eat healthy when they have no supermarket in a 5-mile radius and they don't own a car? But the closest thing they can eat is at the AM PM. How are you going to tell someone to eat healthy if it costs less to buy a soda at an AM PM where it's a penny an ounce versus a bottled water, and they're strapped for cash? It just doesn't make any sense. And so, addressing those inequities and how they affect our communities of color are going to make huge dividends in the health outcomes of our communities. Yeah, I think that the physicians deserve a seat at the table as well as any community member.
And darned if you do, darned if you don't. I think I'm stuck right in between a space where I don't qualify for any programs to get any subsidies, but I'm also not in a space where I have any cash left over at the end of the month. I mean, I'm a family of 8, and so it is very difficult to just go through and budget every month to make sure that we have enough at the table and that we're not crunching at the end of the month. And how do you not say okay to bread when bread is filling, tortillas are filling, and you've got to feed such a large family? And I totally agree on the food deserts. It is ridiculous how many communities have only one general store where they offer some groceries, and those groceries, because it is one of the few stores, are very expensive, more expensive than what you would get in the city. And we've got a lot of communities that are in dire need of support, and families like myself that maybe you're not right here, but you're not there either. You don't have such a highly elevated salary that you can go for all organic, even though you wish to do so. Maybe you cannot do so because it's a crunch.
We are really, go ahead, Dr. Winston. We are getting in the thick of it.
That at a different level, I think it's important that we advocate for transparency to consumers in terms of what their health insurance provides. And navigating the system is harder than it needs to be, especially when you're sick. And that I would also like to point out that I want people to understand that going to the doctor and getting preventative care is so powerful and oftentimes worth more than waiting until you actually need treatment for something that's gone wrong.
I don't know if it's a lot for me to be like, I am yes queening behind the scenes, but I am yes queening behind the scenes because we're doing, I think that you all are doing a great job at bringing your expertise to the table, because this resonates with my personal health, my family's health as a person of color. And I think what's beautiful about diversity is how abundant it is in perspective. I do want to give some time to talk about what's working and what are wins that community can kind of take, specifically because you all are the expertise in your industries. So maybe get some time to like marinate on how can people get a hold of you, or how can they get in contact with you, and then maybe sharing what is it that you're seeing that's working. And then what we'll end on some call to actions, because I think we've said so many great things on just acknowledging perspective. Dr. Winston just shared transparency. So Amber, if you don't mind, if you start us off, since you were able to kick off this chat, what are you seeing in your industry that's working for community?
So I think it's something as simple as taking the survey. I know the city of Visalia puts out surveys on, well, what do you think this community needs? What do you think it lacks? I know I just took one on like prioritizing things. Even the Goshen Trail on Goshen Street, should it be have more space? What should the aesthetic be like? Something as small as taking a survey, so then the city knows, the community knows what's needed, what's not needed. I think that is the forefront of trying to move forward in order to build that community, because it's more than just healthcare. Having better community overall has a healthy community, obviously. Something else I see is, I know, simple as knowing how to make an appointment and how to call a doctor. High school sports, they require sports physicals. And I coach soccer, and a lot of my students didn't know how to even make an appointment or how to move forward. And I think once you have the confidence or the idea of, oh, I can call and make an appointment, or I can go online to do it, that helps with preventative care and then that access to healthcare as well. So I think just being involved in those easy surveys and just knowing how to even make an appointment can start off and kick off, like, hopefully healthy habits.
Thank you, Ambar. How can folks get a hold of you if they want to share more?
I will put my phone number in our chat, and hopefully, does that go to?
Yeah, I'll take care of it. What I'll do is at the end of the conversation, I'll go back in Facebook and put appropriate channels for folks to engage with you.
Okay.
Someone help me out. Who came? Dr. Guzman, I believe you were second. Can you maybe share what's working in your industry? What are you seeing that's elevating diversity?
Well, I think from the residency program's perspective, it's being intentional about recruiting a diverse residency class as well as a diverse faculty, with the mission statement of training and recruiting and educating physicians that are here to serve the Central Valley and the diverse community that we live in. And that's something that I'm very proud of, something that we've been working on diligently. We're going to have, we just had our newest class that matched with us, or that are going to come and train. They just found out that they're going to be moving from wherever they are in the United States to Visalia to train for the next 3 to 5 years in a residency program. And so that's very exciting for us. And again, we go back and look at policies that pertain to recruitment so that we can match a diverse class and people that are representative of the Central Valley. The other thing is, again, supporting our pipeline programs, supporting programs that put doctors back into the community, like street medicine, have been wins for us. I think that opening our doors, letting them know that graduate medical education or our residency programs, our physicians are here to work with the community, are here to collaborate, and are going to take active roles. I am lucky enough to sit on our Tulare County Medical Society Board of Directors. And I know that they've been very active in doing COVID pop-up clinics, and also being very supportive of our residents and allowing them, actually providing them with incentives to take part in our pipeline programs as well as our street medicine programs. So it takes a community, and so I think that those have been big ones for us. And I'll put my email in the chat and you can pass that along.
I appreciate you. Thank you. I believe this is for Dr. Winston, if that's okay.
Yeah, I would like to, I guess, thank Kuya Delta for starting the residency programs. And I think that it's working, that, we are keeping the doctors that we're training. And even before we started the residency programs, the word docere is Latin, right, for the root word of doctor, and it really means to teach. And faced with job opportunities everywhere for physicians, physicians gravitate toward places that have training programs because it is very fulfilling to teach and to train the next generation. I would also like to highlight the fact that we have an affiliation with USC now. And a big part of that is because of our street medicine program, that providing that amazing experience to be a provider and really bring back the humanity of taking care of people is what actually originally attracted that relationship to happen. And so I want to grow those relationships as well. And then, yeah, we just had our match. We are welcoming 47 new doctors to the local area as of the end of June. And we hope to continue at the rate that we're continuing to keep them, because I think it's working. If you could, Dr. Guzman would get them in kindergarten here in Visalia and just grow them right into the residency programs. And I think that's the long-term goal. But so far, things are going really well. We're really proud of it. Oh,
it's
and
so beautiful.
My email in the chat as well.
Thank you. And I think what's really beautiful about that order, totally unplanned, is I think you guys just showed what it looks like to be on a quality team where there's trust in the system and trust in each other, that you're really creating like everybody's on the same page, and let's all understand that we're actually focusing, like Dr. Guzman said, we're being intentional about cultivating. What's beautiful about Reina and Myra is I feel like with your careers, you're really embedded in the community from a community facing aspect, and you deal with folks that are just like everyday folks like myself. What are some wins that you're seeing from the community aspect? Reina, we'll start with you, and then Myra, you'll close us off.
Thank you. To me, I am a grassroots organizer at heart. I thank everybody who has come before me, and I will always make a shout out and call all my colleagues to do so. If you are not already mentoring somebody, anybody, please make that a commitment, a life commitment. I think at all moments we should be mentoring somebody and helping share any wealth of knowledge that we may have, even if to us it may seem just like a little bit of knowledge, but that little bit means so much to somebody who has just been awaiting somebody to be a big brother, be a big sister. And I have to say that I am where I am today thanks to somebody who took that time with me to teach me that there was so much more to life, that there was so much to love, there was so much to live for. It was thanks to a mentor. May she rest in peace. Rosie Llamas, I will forever love her. And I will say this is really the reason why I decided to be a part of Proteus, was because I have history going back as far as Rosie Llamas, my mentor, who helped me see more in myself than I could see at that moment. So be a mentor. I would say have deliberate conversations with community. Listen. Don't bring ideas to the table, just listen. And sometimes that itself helps us guide every other idea and every other step, and really allows us to give not what we feel is needed, but what is really needed and really called upon from community. So I would definitely like to continue having more of those heart-to-heart conversations. I'd love to talk to anybody who is serving the community. I'm going to drop my information in the chat, phone number, my email. I'd love to talk to you if you want to just see our community continue to thrive and develop relationships and really be there for one another. I am here. I will forever be a Tulare County baby. This is my home, and I would love to see more happening, more of this positivity and these conversations, so that we can accomplish great things together.
You guys, Reina is 100% true. Like everything she said, she will help you. So feel encouraged to reach out to her. She's a wonderful human that way. Myra, what about you? What are you hearing from your community? What's working?
So like for us, our part of our mission statement, the council, is connecting our community with resources, connecting them with organizations that can help. And furthering that on, it's letting them know they can become, self-sustainable, so like recently we started a youth group, and I think having that connection, like I said, with the younger ones, they're the ones that the world belongs. And I tell them, you guys, Ivanhoe belongs to you guys already, but the future of it is for you guys. And whether they stay in Ivanhoe or not, they go somewhere else. We build, strong-minded, courageous youth that know their power, that know their voice, they know how to use it. Then wherever they go, they'll make a positive difference. And I think, to me, that's something that's going great. If anybody wants to reach me, I have put it in there. Right now, our youth group is meeting 2 Tuesdays a month, the 1st and the 3rd. So if anybody wants to join, there's no age limit either. I just put it out there, any youth, because I think the younger ones, even the little ones, have great ideas that, if we're not asking them, we don't know what they want. And to me, that's something that's working out great. Just I had to learn that, I stepped into the whole role kind of like slowly, thinking like, oh, I'm just gonna do this because we need someone that knows how to do it. And I loved it. I keep going and I keep thinking, okay, we've done this, but what else do we need to do? And that's kind of the questions that I've been asking them, like, what is it that you guys want? And I think that first time I asked, they were still kind of shy. So they kind of repeated the same stuff we had already introduced. So I feel like the more that they get to know, it is really about what do you want and what do you see? Because as we went back and, once we were talking about, let's design our own park, I'm hearing through them, well, they have this one park where there's a really nice place to take pictures of. We don't have that. Okay, let's incorporate it in. So I think really teaching our youth that they have a voice. Obviously, every single person has a voice. And I think that's my biggest goal, is just letting people know, use your voice, whether it's something small, big, that's how you're going to get stuff done.
You all are so incredible. We probably have maybe 3 minutes left. So I just want to take this time to really say thank you so much for bringing your expertise, your knowledge, your wisdom, investing your time in community. I really appreciate some of the calls to action that came out, which is like being intentional. Dr. Guzman, I really love the call to civic participation. Amber added the current ways that you can participate today. I also heard we can keep the lights on at Riverway Sports Park along with Plaza Park. And yeah, just leaning in and providing that mentorship or that sheroship to folks of color to provide some of that safety net. And I think also for anybody watching, this is your opportunity to take perspective and integrate it into your own life. Without further ado, I want to hand this back over to James with Visalia Times Delta. But thank you so much, everybody, for being here.
Thank you. And thank you for all the panelists for taking part tonight on the broadcast. This broadcast can be, if you missed part of it and you want to watch the entire thing, you will be able to watch a replay on the Visalia Times Delta Facebook page, our YouTube page, and then VisaliaTimesDelta.com. And we encourage to share this broadcast on your Facebook page too, if you thought it was valuable. Next month, we will be continuing our forums on systemic racism in Tulare County, and we will focus on education. So keep an eye out for in April for that forum. And for everyone who tuned in and all panelists and our terrific moderator, Lisa, thank you all very much. And we will see you next month with our forum on education. Good night, everybody.